Hi everyone, Teddy Baldassarre here, and in this video, we're going to be looking at some of the best dress watches in the luxury segment. I cannot include all of the dress watches in the luxury segment here because we'd be here for hours, but I am going to look at 17 leading dress watches. I believe it's 17 if I counted correctly. It might be more, but it's a lot that we're gonna go through here, looking at a wide range of price ranges, but really looking at that luxury tier of dress watches. I'm a huge proponent of the dress watch. I think it is something that is very overlooked. I think it's underappreciated in regards to its flexibility, its versatility, and how you're able to wear it in a wide variety of environments. And in all those situations where you do need to dress up, it is absolutely going to do the job. In addition, before we jump into this video, we also will have an article down below with an additional 30 dress watches. Some of them are going to be also included in this video here, but even in addition to that, a lot of them that aren't going to be mentioned will be in that article just to save me some of the time of going ahead and going through every single one of them. I definitely would check that out as well if you want even more to get lost into. So to begin here, I did think about where is the best place to start when you're looking at, say, a luxury dress watch. And I was considering elements that I would be looking for, maybe some great design. Also, when it comes to the movements, getting something that is going to be manufactured more in-house. And for that, I wanted to start really around that $2,000 price range, because I think this is really where you start to see some definitive leaders become available to you. And two brands that we'll start with, one is going to be Longines. So some people might be saying to start this off, Longines, interesting, why'd you start there? Well, when I was able to visit Longines, and I will admit my own just not ability to know what they were actually doing on site, but seeing Longines actually assemble their movements, and I was able to go through their different facility and see in person that they were assembling their movements on site, right down from their corporate offices. This isn't something where they're doing it off site. So, I mean, a lot of brands would call it in-house. And what I was seeing there was things that we would probably give props to Tudor for and other brands, and I just kind of didn't know that this was even taking place. I figured, Swatch was, doing a lot of the production. That's really not the case for Longines, and that's really what makes them more unique compared to a lot of the brands underneath them. And then considering that, you also have some great designs, and one that I'll recommend here is going to be the Sector Dial. This is a watch I personally own as well and absolutely love. One of my favorite watches in their lineup, so my money where my mouth is there. 38.5 millimeter case, thickness of 10.9 millimeters, nice lug to lug. Whereas a little bit larger, I'd say like around a 39 on wrist. Sapphire crystal with good AR coating on it as well. And then getting one of their movements on the inside, 70-hour power reserve, SI hairspring. A lot to like here from Longines. The other watch that I'll recommend here is Nomos. I think Longines and Nomos for around $2,000 just make the best dress watches available. When it comes to Nomos, I think a big reason why is their alpha manual movements. It's a well-positioned movement. It's produced in-house. It is based on the Pazoo 7001, but the reason why they started producing these under their own roof is because they were not able to get access to these movements anymore. Very thin, so you're talking about a watch that's 8.3 millimeters thick for the Orion 35, which is a watch I own as well. Lug to lug, of course, going to be a little bit more extended out, so I would add at least a millimeter to maybe 2 millimeters to the proposed size on some of these watches, depending on which one you go for. Great looks, variety of different styles to go for. You could also look at the Ludwig, the Tangente. Great options across the board. Nomos has to be one of my picks here to start off as well. Next, we have the Baume & Mercier Clifton Baumatic. And when continuing to go up here, you think about where are the unique points of value. And for this watch, I think it simply is the looks are great. I love the handset with the different dial colors that you can choose from. This is probably my favorite watch from Baume. Also very wearable dimensions, 40 millimeters by 46.6 millimeters in the lug to lug area. Also getting 50 meters of water resistance, so more than some of the other dress watches on this list. But the big reason why I think this watch is so compelling is going to be the movement on the inside. The Baumatic caliber, COSC certified, 5-day power reserve, class leading for the price range. The only thing that can really rival it is the caliber 400s from Oris, and that's essentially it. I would say most exceptional power reserves around this price range are starting to get around 70. That's becoming more of the luxury standard if you look across the industry, especially if you're trying to keep a higher beat rate movement. So to see a 4 hertz movement with a 5-day power reserve, this is why I think this watch is truly compelling. For our next watch here, we have the Cartier Tank Must. And if you're looking at a dress watch list, you need to have a Cartier on the list. I like personally the Cartier Tank Louis, but this would probably be the better option for more people out there. It gets you into Cartier at a very compelling price range. I think people almost forget $4,200 can get you an automatic Cartier tank. They refer to this one more as like an XL size, which really is not an accurate representation. It's 41 by 31, so it's not going to wear like an XL style at all. Sure, compared to some of the entry-level quartz options with the mediums, going to be bigger than that, but still very contained on the wrist. 8.4 millimeters in thickness. Movement on the inside is an 1847. The tank is one of those icons in watchmaking, released back in 1918, worn by different celebrities, prominent figures, you name it. And to get one of these watches on your wrist for around $4,000, Cartier isn't always the brand for value for dollar. It's more of a jewelry brand in some instances, but they do make fantastic watches. And to get a watch like this right north of $4,000 is a fantastic deal. Speaking of fantastic deals, I think another watch that is lost on people in terms of its positioning, not so many, it's still a very good seller for the brand, I know. That's the SBGW collection from Grand Seiko, specifically here the 231. Now this is a watch that has been in the collection for some time. This movement on the inside, the 9S64, was introduced in 2011. And what a lot of people don't realize, and I had a whole sit down with Joe Kirk, their brand curator, I'd recommend checking out that video if you want a good jumping off point for Grand Seiko. I talked about the architecture of the 9S64 being completely different than the 6.5. It's not just the removal of a rotor here and that's like, okay, job well done. Sometimes Grand Seiko makes things more complicated than they need to be, but that's why I think you pay the extra dollar to get into the brand. It's nicely finished, great proportions. You're talking about a 37.3 millimeter case, nice thickness despite the dome sapphire crystal, also getting a lug-to-lug of 44.3 millimeters, so wearing rather true to size. Another element of this watch that I love is just the simplicity. It's pure, no date. And then also the curvature of the dial is something that gets lost on many people. It's also one of those like ineffable type of concepts that you just probably pick up with your eyes, but you don't necessarily always put it to words. And a great deal of variations in this SBGW collection too, if you want to go for some different dial colors as well. So I am a huge fan of the moon phase complication. I have a whole video on some of the best options in moon phase watches, and this watch was certainly on there, and that is the Zenith Elite Moon Phase. Now the Elite collection, to say that it is not talked about to the same degree as the Chronomasters would be an understatement. It is a watch that is not necessarily in the wheelhouse of what many people consider when they think of Zenith. But this is from a luxury standpoint where Zenith is positioned as more of an artisanal type of watchmaker in some of their creations. A very well-positioned watch, all things considered. You're talking about a piece that's around $7,000 for price, pretty wearable dimensions, a little bit larger than maybe what some people might like. 45.3 millimeter lug-to-lug though makes this one wear smaller than the proposed diameter, still thin at 9.2 millimeters, the perks of that Elite 692 caliber on the inside, making this one of the more value-packed moon phase dress watches in the luxury tier. For our next piece, we have the Omega Constellation Globemaster. So this was the watch that I probably wore the most in 2022. I adore this watch. I have been a big fan of it for a long time. I finally decided to get one. The reason why I like it, one, I'm a huge fan of the Constellation family. It goes back to 1952, and this really revives a lot of the origins of the original or earlier references. C-case type of bezel design, then you also have the pipe hand dial, and then also the connection to their different points of accuracy in their history. Omega, with this piece being unveiled in 2015, we saw the unveiling of the METAS certification. The 8900 caliber is one of my favorite calibers from Omega, and really just in luxury watchmaking. I think it's very robust. It also has the ability to isolate the local hour hand. I really enjoy that. And a 2-barrel design, which allows better distribution of energy to the escapement. 100 meters of water resistance and a tungsten carbide bezel as well, which from a scratch resistance standpoint is only going to be less than diamond in terms of hardness. Now, some people might be saying, put the Rolex Cellini on this list. You're gonna talk about Rolex and dress watches. But sorry, I think you have to go with the, say, boring pick and go with the Datejust. Now, someone here that, of course, has owned many Datejusts, I still love the Datejust. Although it is so overdone, I don't think I can ever grow tired of it. It's just a watch that is iconic. It has a design language that is beautiful. Since the 1940s, it's now paved the way for other watches to follow, looking at the day date, and of course the Sky Dweller more recently with its annual calendar design. I simply love the Datejust. I think it looks beautiful. It's one of the emblematic watches of Rolex, and I think it's a no-brainer for somebody that's looking for a watch that also walks the line of dress, a little bit of flash, but also being great in the situation of maybe even wearing it to the beach with a t-shirt and some swim shorts. I think it still works there. So one of the big questions people always ask, especially when you're talking about dress watches, iconic dress watches, some might ask, tank or reverso? Which one do you go for and why? For me, I think I would go with the reverso. I wouldn't always give that answer. In the past, I might say the tank, but I've just evolved, and I think the reverso to me speaks a little bit more uniquely to what I like. It's of course going to have its iconic nature, but it doesn't scream at you across the room. But once you discover it, you also see the details of the case, which has 50 components in itself with the case system. Also look at their movements. You learn about JLC in terms as a watchmaker, and then you also consider that many of the Cartier tank movements were being made by JLC in years prior. You start to understand why JLC is such a special manufacturer. I recently was able to visit their manufacturer and go through all the hidden details of their process. So if you want to see more about that, I'd recommend checking it out because I think that will also kind of sell the proposition here. Specifically, I want to talk about just the Reverso Tribute small seconds. This is a nice carryover into some contemporary form with the 1931 design. Looks great, wears well on the wrist, 27.4 millimeters with the diameter, lug to lug of 45.2 millimeters. So pretty restrained, all things considered. I think this is a great modern size for a dress watch, especially in a rectangular format. Manual JLC 822/2 caliber on the inside. You also have the flip side available. This is not a duo face. You have the stainless steel back of the watch, which you can have for engraving, which I think is a cool little side note for somebody that does want to have maybe a small little connection or a nice little piece of their own personal touch to a watch that they're looking to get in this dress category. For our next piece, we have a watch from Glasuta Original, and that is the Panamatic Lunar. The entire Panamatic collection is one of the best values in dress watches in all of watchmaking. Period. Now, does it look like a Lange 1, and did it come available in 2003, well after the Lange 1's release? Yes. But it still delivers a lot for the price. You're talking about an engraved balance cock, not to the same degree of Lange, but still very well done. But one element that I've heard is the patented date mechanism that is used for the big date on these watches is kind of the envy apparently around the streets of Glasuta. And that's pretty cool if you think about some of the other brands that are in that city. Also, when it talks to real cred for GO, I mean, the reason why they're called the original is because when the Germans lost control of this part of Germany, we're talking about a small city outside of Dresden, many of the brands and assets of German watchmaking at the time came together under an organization called GUB, and that brand, which really was German watchmaking in this area, became Glasuta Original. That's why they call them Original. They even have ownership of the school in Glasuta for watchmaking, so many of the watchmakers that go to that school go work at other brands even. But the watch here, beautiful, great symmetry, and also talking about a watch just over $10,000 for this movement, probably one of the best finished movements that you're going to find in this price segment without question. So now for this next watch and brand on this list, this is the Piaget Alta Plano. When you're considering dress watches in this price segment, I think not enough people consider Piaget. If you look at their history, they specialize in ultra thin movements. Actually, back in 1957, they released the 9P, and that movement at the time in 1957 was 2 millimeters thick for a manual caliber. They had to redesign the balance wheel and really think about how they could get a movement that thin. And the watch that you're looking at here also is going to have a movement with their 430P at around 2 millimeters thick. So you're talking about an incredibly thin movement, a case itself fully cased up, 6.4 millimeters, so I believe the thinnest on this entire list here today. 38 millimeters in size for this configuration, beautiful simplistic looks, and a brand that certainly, again, is very underrated when it comes to the world of dress watches, considering the many developments that they have to their name in this world. So next up here, we have one of my favorite brands on the list, and that is Breguet with the Classique 5157. Considering dress watches in the price range, this is one of the leaders for myself, and I think so many people, again, just don't consider Breguet enough. It is, when talking about the most important names in watchmaking, Abraham Louis Breguet really is the pinnacle of that. 1775 name really gets its founding, 1801 patented the tourbillon, popularized rose engine or straight line lathe machines, and really allowed this beautiful guilloche art to come to the forefront. This is the specific version I'm looking at here, having this white gold dial with rose engine techniques to create this beautiful design. Also wearable dimensions, and it looks like I was wrong in terms of looking at that Piaget. You're looking at 5.3 millimeters in thickness, so ultra thin here, 38 millimeters in case size. Nice finished movement, the Breguet 502.3 with a gold oscillating weight. But really for me, what makes this watch so special is going to be the rose engine guilloche work that you're gonna see on the front side of the dial. Simply beautiful. I was able to actually see a lot of the work being done on these Breguet watches. Probably the most rose engine machines I've ever seen in one room in my entire life. They're still doing this art form to the same exceptional level this very day. For our next watch on the list, we have the Patek Calatrava, the 6119. So this is the newer creation from Patek, following the lineage of the 5119, following that hobnail style design that I think is the style that I consider the most when looking at the Calatrava family. I just think this is beautiful. And also from a size and then movement standpoint, there's a lot to like here. 39mm case, but the real reason why I think this watch is very special is the new movement architecture with the 3255 PS. For myself, I just love the way that everything is oriented with the design. 2 mainspring barrels on a 4 Hz movement, which is not always the norm when it comes to Patek Philippe. And the architecture of the bridges, especially for the gear train, I just think looks beautiful on these watches. Different metal options to choose from here in terms of the different configurations, but just a simply beautiful watch and epitomizes class from Patek Philippe. People can talk all they want about the Nautilus and Aquanaut. I'd happily take a Calatrava on my list as well. So now for our next piece, we have another personal favorite of mine, and that is the Vacheron Constantin Historique 1921. I've covered this watch in a couple different precious metal options on the channel if you want to get lost in it even more. Just simply how the watch really came to be. It was produced in the early 1920s for the American market as a drive watch. This was when the economy was booming, or after the war, and to really get into the industrialized type of world that was happening in the United States, there was a lot of people that were getting automobiles, and they wanted a watch that could be easily read when having their hands at 10 and 2. That's at least how the story goes. This watch is oriented in a very unique way to allow that 10 and 2 position for your hands to be on the wheel and still be able to see with good vantage point the actual time on your wrist. 40mm case, 8.3mm in thickness, and a lug to lug of 46mm. Kind of a weird way to measure out this watch. Has more of a cushion case style, and then on the inside a very solid leading movement with the VC 4400AS, a movement that looks the part. It's well finished, and when Kari Voutilainen also gives props to this movement, I think that gives you even further confidence that you're getting a great product. I'm noticing that every single one of these I'm saying it's a personal favorite of mine, Maybe I just love dress watches. I didn't realize I love these things so much, but that is also true if I say this here. One of my personal favorites, the Lange 1. The Lange 1 is a watch that was created in 1994 as one of the 4 original leading designs of the rebirth of Lange as a brand. Beautiful architecture, 38.5mm case, proportions are beautiful. The spacing of the dial and use of negative space is probably the best I have seen in all of watchmaking. 9.8mm in thickness, and the movement on the inside is simply beautiful. This is the L121.1, 3/4 plate, heat blued screws, gold chatons, engraved balance cock. It just has all the fixings that you expect from Lange, and one of the most beautiful watches in the price segment. There really is nothing else truly like a Lange 1, so if you love the Lange 1, it's hard to get out of your mind, spoken from true personal experience. And now for our final watch on this list, we have a watch from FP Journe with the Chronomètre Souverain, specifically the Havana version. The Chronomètre Souverain collection is not new for FP Journe by any means. This watch, fairly newer though, in 2017 unveiled for this Havana dial version, identified specifically with that beautiful brown dial, which is remarkably striking when paired with the golden hue of the case. On that case, 40mm, thickness of 8mm, and inside you have the FP Journe 1304 movement. One of the best looking movements in the price segment. I just think the architecture in terms of how this is positioned is beautiful. The really interesting fact about this movement is, for one, of course, made of gold, but really the interesting fact is how the architecture is positioned. You have this barleycorn type of chasm in between the balance wheel and then the 2 opposing barrels that are going to be on the other side. You might be asking, how is that energy even flowing through this movement? How this is happening is Francois Paul structured this movement where the gear train is going to be on the reverse side of the base plate, so you don't actually see it. So you have more of this floating escapement is what they would call it. If you want more information about this, I actually have a full sit down with Laurent Journe, brother of FP Journe, where we did this, just walk through some of their most eclectic and beautiful pieces, including this one, to kind of show the range of what they're creating. But if you want to get lost in FP Journe, I'd recommend checking out that video. Absolutely adore this brand. But all right, guys, that is my video here taking a look at some great dress watches in the world of luxury watches. watches. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Really would appreciate that. Also, definitely check out our article down below looking at some great picks for dress watches. And while you're there, definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com. We have some great dress watches available on our site. Any purchase supports the content here. How we're able to fund all of these productions is through selling watches on our site. So if you are looking and are in a market for a watch, we'd love to have your business. We know you can buy a watch anywhere, but again, we'd love to have your business. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.